Norman Jay MBE. It goes like this. I've got a sore throat. Rick Butler's fault yesterday, by the way. But we're going to talk for a little while and then we're going to allow you to ask questions. So me and Norman used to work together at the BBC 30 years ago in something called the Black Department. Because they had a Black Department, and I think me and Bob Jones were the only two white people that worked there. However, so today, Norman, you've come down, you've seen the scooters, you're famous for collecting minis and chopper bikes, but you also collect scooters, don't you? Tell us about that.
Well, 1, 2, just checking. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Marco and Eddie for inviting me down, and Sarah as well. Taking me completely out of my comfort zone. But I'm sure you'd agree, you know, it's been, for most of us, the best part of 18 months, maybe 2 years, since we were able to get together and enjoy something like this. So it's great for our heads, it's great for our well-being. It's just great to be amongst people who share a similar passion. As Eddie just rightly alluded to, I've always loved the whole mod thing about scooters, clothing, attitude to life, the way you live your life. And I kind of was always been on the periphery of the mod scene, outside looking in, but that was my choice. Until about 15 years ago, Eddie came across my path one day and called me in his face. He said, "You're mod, you just don't know you are." I went away and thought about that. I never really thought about it because in the 80s, a lot of my contemporaries and peers were quite big on the scooter scene and the mod dressing scene. I wasn't, you know, my career path was into other things. But in the early 80s, mid 80s, I had a van that used to carry my Good Time sound system around. And my mum would be getting calls at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. "Oh, can we borrow Norman's van to come and pick my scooter up?" And that's why I thought I'd never owned one, never really wanted to own one, because I must have picked up about 20, 30 bikes in various parts of London, all hours, mostly Lambrettas.
I think you're talking about Lambrettas, aren't you? Absolutely.
So I vowed I'd never get a Lambretta, but I'd always admired the style and the detail. My personal thing came a few years later. The Rally Chopper was created in 1969, and I'm a big aficionado on that, so I kind of get the whole scooter thing, because I'm like that with my bikes. I've got too many, can't even think about it. How many? At the last count, probably about 30 odd.
So you've got 30 Rally Choppers. Okay.
And a collection of minis as well, because minis were my thing as well.
How many minis?
4 or 5 in various stages. A couple of vans I still own. I came down in my classic mini today. But I've always loved the whole sort of mod scooter thing and the people involved in it. So when Eddie put that on me, I went away and thought about it. I looked back at my life and realised Eddie was absolutely right, because I love the music, I love the clothes, I love the people, and I love the whole uniquely British culture that, you know, embodies the whole thing. So when I got the call from Eddie to come down and do this, I'm like, wow, I'm really not sure, because of my mental health. I guess for a lot of us feeling, you know, locked up for so long, I don't know if I can come down and face the crowd and speak. But then when I thought about it, my wife Jade said, "You need to go." It's absolutely amazing. I think you should all give yourselves a round of applause for turning out, supporting it. It's brilliant.
So, okay, let's go back to the very beginning, Norman. How did you start? When did you decide you wanted to be a DJ?
The whole DJing thing really didn't just start, it kind of evolved. My parents, my dad's 88 tomorrow, it's great. You know, the Windrush generation. I was born in Notting Hill, Ladbroke Grove, 1957. I'm 64 next month. And was a young kid, you know, living on an estate where the older guys used to ride scooters. They were mods. And I thought, I want to be like that. And in the mid-60s, a lot of young youths, black youths, were coming over from Jamaica and the Caribbean and evolved a style of dressing, which you guys call rude boy. Yeah, I was a rude kid in those days, but I kind of always related to that. And growing up, you know, in West London, 1960s, 1970s, came from a multicultural background. My mates were white, Asian, Jewish. We didn't see colour. We shared a love of music. We shared a love of dressing up, what we could afford. In those days, couldn't really afford a lot, but you know, it was aspirational. I'm sure quite a lot of us here, sort of black, white, working class. You go, you do a shit job, and it's all about buying your music, buying your clothes, going out at the weekends.
See, I've actually got a question here, because something that was very important growing up is something that's disappeared, and I'm sure that it played a big part in your life, and it played a big part in a lot of young DJs' lives, and that is the youth club, where you get to hear left field music as a 12-year-old played by the 14-year-old, you know. So I mean,
yeah, the youth club was very important. The youth club was where, or the church hall. Even before, you had to be 13 to go to a youth club. But before that, you went to a church hall, school disco, and you're right. You know, an older person would bring records. But I used to bring records to youth clubs to play for older kids. I'm talking sort of early 70s, because buying records was a ritual in our house. You know, I bought records, bought my first. People ask me over the years, what was the first record you bought? Well, I can't really remember the first record I bought, because I was given a £5 note by my dad just before Christmas.
That was quite a lot of money.
Well, the £5 note used to be that big. it was massive. I remember that. And, you know, he trusted me enough to, because he knew that I used to get on the bus from Acton, 2 buses, 266 to the Acton High Street, 207 bus to Shepherd's Bush Market, because we all hung out at the market. And they used to have a little record shop in there, a reggae record shop, called Webster's. And up until a few years ago, that was still there. And all the local rude boys, from Ladbroke Grove, Portobello, Shepherd's Bush, Acton, and all the skinheads used to go there. That was a real focal point. We used to buy our records there, and I remember going there as about 8 or 9-year-old, being really intimidated. I got there in the afternoon, and I didn't buy a record until 5 minutes before he closed. And I remember buying probably about a dozen records and watched, and the buzz that gave me was unreal. But I think amongst those records would have been a few Motown records, and then
Rocksteady.
Subsequently, Rocksteady, you know, Desmond Decker, and I bought soul records like The Impressions, Aretha, Marvin, because Marvin Gaye was always big in our house. But that started a lifelong collection of buying records when you could afford to.
Now, you know, many people, when you say Norman Jay, would think of, well, you're synonymous with the rare groove scene, which was something that kind of happened just before Acid House and was a major rejuvenating factor for the mod scene, because, you know, the mod scene had been kind of in the doldrums for a few years, and then suddenly there's new clubs playing funk. And, you know, there's certainly boogaloo, things like that, certainly mod-related things, and it gave us a new horizon. So how did rare groove come about from your perspective?
Well, I think the whole rare groove thing began for me around the sort of early 80s. Basically, the rare groove thing happened is when black DJs and black promoters basically reclaimed their music. I lived all through the 70s, going to New York, buying records, you know, funk, soul, jazz. You know, I've lived through every evolution of black music. And then by the time the rare groove thing started in the 1980s, it was basically when the white media, music media, style media, saw us. Suddenly we were there.
But But see, this is also, it's a very British phenomenon.
Yeah, of course
it didn't happen. It had no, comparison in New York, for example, the coolest city in America. It just, you couldn't hear
Well, the weird thing for me, what really motivated me, my attitude to it was quite punkish. I didn't want to go by any of the soul boy, soul girl rules. I came through kicking off doors, doing house parties. I'm a lifelong teetotaler, so pubs never really interested me.
Never got that. No.
Yeah. So, my route, like, a lot of black British kids came through house parties, beginning in youth clubs, christenings, weddings, at home, because we weren't allowed to play. We weren't welcome to play in clubs. They wouldn't hire or book black DJs. And that was another driving factor of why we adopted the do-it-yourself ethic of doing it ourselves.
That's kind of led to the warehouse.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for people that, missed that part of British culture, what was the warehouse scene about? How did it come about? And what did you do?
Well, the warehouse scene came about roughly, for me, 1985, 86. We just went around looking for old factories, anywhere that wasn't being used, because you have to remember, at that time in London in particular, Covent Garden in 1986 was a wasteland. Shoreditch, believe it or not, was a wasteland. London docks were just being knocked down, they hadn't built the city up yet. So there's loads of empty walls and stuff lying around. And I used to happen upon a couple of sort of hippie things that were going on, thinking, wow, this is amazing. I've got a sound system, I can get hold of a generator, I've got a van, I was completely self-sufficient. I've got all the records I'll ever need to play there. And it was like a new frontier, because playing at those parties meant I could play whatever I liked. There was no rules. But I was very careful not to label it as, as a black music thing. In essence, it was. But I played, original R&B, I played soul, I played reggae, all the things I was brought up with. And as a black DJ in 1985, I used to play a lot of the white records that I loved, which, there was no outlet for me to play it.
How did that go down?
Fantastically well, which brings me back to the mod scene, because to my original parties, I noticed more and more mod kids and blokes, girls, were turning up, because I play a lot of 60s music. I've always loved the Small Faces. I love 60s pop. Short of the Who, I didn't really sort of go chart pop, but cool white pop, cool white jazz.
Roger Daltrey was in the Italian restaurant over the road last night, by the way. I wouldn't let him in for free.
But that was a melting pot, because all going back as far as you like, white working class youth culture has always, without exception, had a love and an affinity with black music, whether it's from jazz, from post-war, right up to the present day. So I used to play quite a lot of Northern, mix it in, none of the rules. If I want to play a couple of Northern tracks, I will. If I want to play a couple of hip-hop tracks, I will. Boy, how I play it, properly eclectic. And I found that the crowds reflected that, because I love mods, soul boys, punks, rustas. I'm a big fan of The Clash. I used to play quite a lot of punk records and didn't really care. It was basically sticking two fingers and I put the club establishment.
I think the mid-80s was a big melting pot. I mean, you had kind of the end of Brit Funk, which was a major musical awakening. You had kind of the late mod scene, you had early rare groove, you had b-boy culture, you had, early British hip-hop with the likes of Derek B and people like that. So it was a very interesting time. But I'm going to change the subject completely, totally, because this is something we've spoken about before, and I know you're very proud to have been honoured with an MBE. Tell us why you're proud. Because some people say, for example, Benjamin Zephaniah, used to be signed to Acid Jazz, he wouldn't accept an MBE. So tell us.
Well, that was his choice.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. I was always going to accept it. Why wouldn't I? My own industry, up until that point, didn't recognise us. So then for the monarch of my country to go, right, I want to honour you for the contributions you've made to black music and to DJing. Of course I was. The press at that time tried very hard to drag me into that, about some black people accepting and some black people not. Well, that's their choice. My attitude was, I used to look to my hero, Nelson Mandela. They locked him up for how many years? Yeah, he still forgave everybody. You can't change what happened. One can only influence the future. And that was my attitude, to be a silent but positive role model going forward. What happened yesterday? It's nothing to do with me. I can't change that, can't influence it. So I was happy to accept my MBE.
I also think you said it made your parents happy.
Yeah, and the community, and just about everyone who knows me. I'm extremely proud of that, I'm black British, really proud of that, patriot, and everything that goes with it. My attitude was, you can't tell me, if you're younger than me, then go away. Don't try and advise me. But, like I said, I can remember in the late 80s, on my bike, I used to cross the St. George on my bike. I used to have it on my scooter. And a lot of my black mates go, how can you do this? It's a skinhead thing, I said, listen, you're too young to understand. The second generation of skinheads in 1980, they adopted the look. National Front, white power, that was something, they adopted the look. Go back a generation before, 10 years ago, and I can tell you the amount of my white mates that used to come and eat my mum's rice and peas and buy Trojan records. And still to this day, I've got mates for 40, 50, probably, going on over 50 years, who are still true to that, living that now.
Now, you're listening to a live Modcast broadcast from the Azure Ballroom in Hastings, and I'm talking, my name is Eddie Pinner, and I'm talking to Norman Jay. Now, these shows are broadcast on TWR, Total Wide Radio, every Tuesday, and yesterday's with Rick and today's with Norman will be coming up over the next couple of weeks. All of our shows, all of the TWR shows, are available on Mixcloud if you want to hear them again. So, Norman, what's your favourite record? The mind went blank. When in doubt, ask him what his favourite record is.
Yeah, how long's a piece of string? My entire collection is my favourite record. My memory's not been that great, and occasionally have a few senior moments, but I'm able to have pretty good power of recall because I've still got virtually, or nearly, every record I've ever bought, and every record that I've bought has a story attached to it, a moment in time. I'm a big football fan, Spurs.
I was desperately trying to avoid the Spurs. Dave Edwards over there, I know he agrees.
But, a lot of those records remind me of, and I'm grateful and thankful, of a very happy childhood. And I hear a tune, thinking straight away, I can remember roughly where I heard it, where I danced to it, who I was snogging at the time. But essentially, it's the soundtrack of my life and my existence, and I'm happy to say, it's been pretty fulfilled, and I'm fortunate, very, very happy. My parents still alive, they're still together. A lot of my mates, broken homes, terrible lives, some of them dead, some of them still in jail now. But yeah, essentially, it's feel good across, all the genres of music. And I guess like most of us, I've enjoyed various phases of music. You know, when I first started going out, funk was the thing. You know, even though I loved sort of Motown and Stax, and then it'd be fair to say in the early 70s with what was going on, you know, in the black communities around America, I became conscious.
But why do you think that American youth, either black or white, didn't get into old soul music in a way? You know, you some of these...
I can easily explain that.
Explain.
Yeah, it's because America has always had this culture of moving forward. They don't look back.
Do you mean black America or America?
Yeah, America, black America, white America, Hispanic America. This is why they create new things. You know, we wouldn't have created jazz in this country. We wouldn't. There's a lot of music forms which would never have been created in this country or in white Europe. All of that music is born out of the black suffering in America. So you've got jazz, you've got gospel, you've got soul, you've got rhythm and blues, which influenced, you know, a whole host of white singers, from the Beatles to Elvis. You know, on my music journey and discovery, you know, a lot of the pop records that I loved as a kid growing up in the 60s were actually covers of black guys who weren't credited. And then I thought to myself, well, that's really weird. And as I got older and got into it, I understood why they weren't credited. You know, Top of the Pops would never bring, you know, even Ready Steady Go hardly would never bring, you know, a black artist from America when they could show 4 white girls dancing to a playback.
But I have to take issue with that, because Ready Steady Go did have a lot of British.
Who were touring the Motown Review and the Stax Review because they were here. But what I'm talking about is bringing them over, especially.
But there was actually a problem with musicians' visas coming from America.
Yeah.
There was this whole union thing where if one of ours goes on tour over there, one of yours can. Yeah. So, you know.
But America actually frowned on letting black people leave the country.
Yeah.
And this government, when I say the UK government, had a policy in the late 60s. Not many people know this, but this is actually true. They didn't, when the riots were happening in 1968, you know, in some of the black neighborhoods in the cities around America, this country and its government, I'm not sure if it was Edward Heath or whoever was at the time, but they were really frightened that that insurrection would spread here. So they put a ban on any of those black records.
I didn't know.
Yeah, for incitement. They were scared that, you know, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud was a record that they were frightened of, and other records of that genre. And I learned this from a black music professor in one of my many trips to America, who was showing me that. It was like unofficial, not said, but if you tried to go into a record shop, say, in the late 60s, and order their records, every excuse would be made so you couldn't get it. So I went on a mission 10, 12 years later to go and find all of those records. Yeah. I found books, I found videos, found, you know, black records. And I'm like, wow.
I'm actually going to talk about black British music now. I think that there are 2 groundbreaking black British records which came to define, and, you know, I'm a white bloke from East London.
No, you're not.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you. You know, I think there are 2 groundbreaking records that are incredibly important in the black British journey, and they are 4 from 8 by The Real Thing, which is about growing up in Toxteth, Liverpool, and Handsworth's Revolution by Steel Pulse. 2 of the finest records ever made. But it's finally when Britain was able to make soul records and reggae. Well, we always make better reggae records than Americans, but you know, those 2 records are just. I mean, as a young British black kid who's hearing High Tension and Steel Pulse, well, you know, what was it like to kind of finally have your own? You know, you're not having to listen to Curtis because you've got Children of the Ghetto. You know.
Well, I guess my tastes by that time were a little bit more developed than that, but yeah, I fully supported, you know, all of those early jazz funk groups coming through. But, you know, at that time, I just discovered the old music of Kenny Lynch. You know, I remember him was
My
one of the few
hero.
black faces, on the TV in the 60s. So,
By the way,
we have a history.
if no one's heard my wonderful show on Kenny Lynch on Radio 4, it's still available on the iPlayer. In fact, Sarah's going to put it up on the Modcast for a link, so if you want to hear it, it's lovely, because Kenny Lynch is one of my heroes and a pathfinder for the Black British community before Windrush, by the way. So, where were we, Norman?
We were locked in conversation then.
I was just...
But about sort of the black groups that are coming through. Yeah, I was a big fan of the real thing, and even some that went on to make pop records. But going a bit deeper than that, my interest always lay in the stuff that we danced to, club music. Used in a very generic way.
Rare groove, I suppose you'd call it.
Rare groove to me was a bit like modernism. It was an attitude to music. Because I used to try and explain, and then I gave up explaining in the end. Rare groove is whatever you wanted it to be.
Same as more.
It's your own interpretation of it. Because in my earliest rare groove parties, I played Thin Lizzy records, I played Clash records, because I personally happen to love those bands. I'm a big fan of Rod Stewart and Elton John. Mate, no secret, don't apologise, I love that stuff. And it's how you hear it, how you're introduced to it, it's all about hearing that record, whatever genre at the right moment. Hear it then, and it's indelible.
Now, since I've been in this world, you have always been a presence on the radio. Going back to the early pirate days, you were very involved in the campaign to legalise Kiss FM. And then you left Kiss FM, but we first worked together on Radio London, but you've got your own show on Soho Radio now, which you were telling me earlier you love because there are no constraints.
Yeah, I mean, like you, Eddie, I came through the BBC ranks. I had 13 great years at Radio London, and before that I was one of the pioneer founders of Kiss FM, the pirate station in London, not Kiss FM, the commercial station that we all know and hate now. But
We do.
But Kiss the Pirate, I was involved in recruiting the DJs. I did the very first show on the 1st of September 1990.
I remember it well.
Yeah, when we...
Do you remember the party at Dingwalls where we were celebrating getting license?
Yeah.
Incredible day.
Half of London's clubland turned out for that. It was an amazing time. And then progressing on to doing BBC radio, which is fantastic. But I left after about 12 years, 13 years at Radio London. I had Dr. Bob Jones, Bob was around somewhere, Eddie, a few of us, Robert Elms.
Ranking this P.
Ranking this P. The one thing, I left the BBC without any drama.
I didn't.
Yeah. Because one learns that you never make an enemy of Auntie. Once that's understood, you work on radio, you work on television. I mean, I still do the odd stuff for BBC and Six Music, but like Eddie said, I do a radio show now, have done since lockdown, since the beginning of lockdown, from my record room at home, internet radio station for Soho Radio. And after the first or second show, it actually dawned on me, it's like a revelation, that for the first time, I can play as much music as I want in the 3 hours I'm allotted. Any music, any genre, no interruptions. Because one's always limited to what one can bring to the station. Back in the day, you bring a box of records, that's all you could play. If you went to a gig, bring a load of records, that's all you could play. You're quite restricted. But doing the music show from home, I'm unrestricted. I can play anything I like. And that really is a gift. In this world.
Radio can be a joyous thing that changes people's life. Good radio is it's just wonderful. During lockdown, people lived forever. There was nothing else you could do. You could just listen to someone on the radio. And I'm a firm advocate of the power of radio, which is why I'm so disappointed at mainstream and BBC radio. I think it's done.
I'm not disappointed with them. They have their agenda, that's the way that they go. I do an internet station. You can download